Okay. I think I figured out some more things here. I'm still trying to figure this out because nothing is so intolerant and so exclusive. And that's what makes it so difficult to deal with. Uh, there isn't anything that can pass through nothing because nothing is nothing. So I think what it is when, or I guess I should say before, there is creation, then there's nothing. And then during the process of creation, that nothing gets transformed into a subject. And so there's a paradox. There's all these paradoxes pertaining to nothing, where like nothing is nothing, that's a paradox. Nothing being nothing, that's a paradox. There's all kinds of these paradoxes, and I think the only resolution to these paradoxes is the invention or creation of a subject. Because, well, if we get these paradoxes, like what is the final outcome of a paradox? And I remember this from basic logic, introduction to logic courses teach you that if you have a paradox or a self-contradiction as a premise, then you can draw any conclusion that you want. Because if 2 plus 2 equals 5, then 5 equals 12 equals 113 is, everything just becomes completely mishmashed. And there's a breakdown of logic and a breakdown of relativity. And so it can't be objective because there's no valid relations between anything. It can't be relative because of the same reason. So then the only thing left for it to be would be subjective. So I think that's why the subject has to appear at the location of what was once nothing and then becomes a subject. But so that takes care of all of us individuals, but it still doesn't answer the question ultimately, globally, what happens to the nothing? And I keep getting this sense that, or this intuition that there's a vast sea of nothing, and then there's, all of creation inside of it. But I don't know if that's really true or not, because nothing always seems to occupy the center, not the volume or the periphery of any arrangement. Now, given the fact that there aren't any limits beyond creation, then we can't really place anything anywhere. It goes back to that mishmash thing. And so then again, what do we make of that? That has to be another subject, which would then be God. And so then you've got God and then creation, but there's no nothing that survives that. And so I don't know what to do with that yet. Globally, maybe what happens is that the nothing gets replaced by God because there's that paradox, and so then given that paradox, then you can draw any conclusion. Okay, well, if I can draw any conclusion, what does that make me? That makes me a subject because I can now have the ability to draw any conclusion. I'm not a program that gets determined to a particular conclusion because there's no valid arguments in existence. So since all the arguments are invalid anyway, then it can't be a computer program. It can't be an object. It can't be a relation. It can't be anything other than a subject, and that subject then must be God. And in that way, we and God are a lot alike. And so that now makes sense. So there once was a nothing, but that nothing has since been replaced by God and then by us as individuals and subjects. So the only place for nothing then would have to be at a place before God, which would then explain where God came from. Because if we had nothing, and then we're going to have this paradox occur. There is no way for there to be nothing and then not have a paradox. It contradicts itself. Nothing contradicts itself. So if we have nothing, we automatically have a contradiction. We automatically have a paradox. We automatically have the ability to draw any conclusion that we wish, given that original paradox. So it seems to me that we had nothing, and it was actually there. And then as soon as it became existent, it then causes, as a consequence of that existence, a paradox. The paradox then causes the subject to appear, because it is a state in which any conclusion can be drawn. And that's what a subject is one who can draw any conclusion that they wish. Because as a subject, I'm not bound to logic like a computer program. I can draw a conclusion that doesn't make any sense. That's why I'm making this video now, because I had drawn a conclusion that didn't make any sense before about things passing through nothing. Well, they can't pass through nothing. So now I think the story has shifted, and so I think it makes more sense now, is that there was once nothing. Then there was a self-contradictory paradox of nothing being nothing, and that is what created God. And so when I'm describing the three absolutes and causal dynamism and all that stuff, I think that is describing the birth of God. Once God gets born, then God makes use of the three absolutes to create us as individuals as fractal self-similar parts of God. And, all those pockets and limits and all that stuff that I had talked about before, that we're looking at before, come into play. So I think all the talk about the absolutes really only pertains to God. And then after God, then we've got God and creation. And the three absolutes are parts of God, and how God creates, and why God exists, because there can't just be nothing. And if nothing ever did exist, then there's this existence or being, and being is really just non-contradiction. So the paradox doesn't invalidate itself in the sense that it is still there. It doesn't get replaced insofar as there is nothing. But the place that nothing goes, or the thing that replaces nothing, because now there is not nothing. If there were, that's all there would be. So, and that's what leads to the paradox, is it's absolutely exclusive. And anything that is absolutely exclusive would have to exclude itself. And that's what I keep saying, is that nothing is self-contradictory. And I've known that for years, because I've looked and looked and looked at it for a very long time. And I've never felt at ease with just skipping over it, because I felt like there was something really profound and poignant about nothing. Having these inherent paradoxes. It would be different if nothing were just stable. If it was just, fine for there to just be nothing, then that would be a lot more interesting, I actually. But the fact that there cannot be nothing because of these paradoxes makes it so that there's a reason that everything exists. If nothing could just exist on its own, there wouldn't be anything else. It would just be nothing. But the fact that nothing is unstable is the reason that it naturally and spontaneously causes these changes to occur. So I don't think that we're all bits of nothing. I think that the nothing, the place for it, is before creation and before the birth of God, as the origin of all origins. Everything comes from nothing. Well, Now that there is not nothing, then I don't think it's necessary that things would have to go back to a state of nothing. I don't think that makes any sense. If you wanted to, you could put nothing, since it goes before creation and before God. You could put nothing after creation and after God if you wanted to put it somewhere. You could say that there is nothing beyond God and creation, that God and creation compose of what is a total reality, where there's nothing beyond that totality. And you could put it there. But it doesn't really belong in creation. And that makes sense, because we don't see nothing anywhere here. And if there were nothing somewhere here, then it would cause paradoxes, and that wouldn't make any sense. So its place is in all the places where we would otherwise find error. And it basically takes the place of the errors. So what was there before God? Nothing. What was there after God? Nothing. What is beyond all totalities? Nothing. Those are the places for nothing. The places for nothing are to occupy places of error that don't exist, that don't make sense. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a lot more intuitive than what I had painted on this canvas before. So the new story is the latest and greatest story that I'm working on. This is why I never write this book, is because every time I try to write it, I run across these errors, and then I have to try to fix it. But I think this fixes it to the point where I can accept it now, is before God's birth, before God emerged, there was nothing. Then, given the establishment of nothing, then we get those limits, and we get being. And we get them all mixed together, which creates the paradox, which creates the need to separate those, and then we get nothing on its own, being on its own, indiscernibility or limits on its own, and causal dynamism between those to act as limits between limits being and absolute nothing. So that combination or configuration would then be God, who then creates creation, which is everything that's in existence, from combining those three things, nothing, being, and indiscernibility, with causal dynamism, applied to God again, so that God is now reflecting upon God's self, which is the folding inward. And it's sort of like, what I think of myself is not myself. And the one who is thinking is distinct from the one who is thought about. And in that way, we can distinguish between ourselves and God, but yet still find a commonality between ourselves and God. So that makes sense. So I think that clears everything up.